Just 2 hours ago, Allied air forces began an attack on military targets in Iraq and Kuwait. These attacks continue as I speak.
Missile launch right there. Another one. Multiple launch.
Operation Desert Storm began on January 17, 1991, and ended before March. Propelled by overwhelming air power and a clear objective, the US-led coalition laid waste to one of the world's largest armies, equipped with Soviet materiel. Saddam's army waved the white flag, fled their southern neighbor, and that was that. Mission accomplished. Because of Operation Desert Storm's rapid, definable success, many consider it to be a, quote, good war, a label that has only become easier to use following the long-lasting wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. However, the operation's success did not make it the most ripe for artistic examination. In comparison to the landing beaches of France or the jungles of Vietnam, Desert Storm is a thematic desert. The second highest grossing Gulf War film of all time, Jarhead, actually uses the banality of the war as its key point of interest. What happens when young warriors anxious for battle are told to sit on their hands as the war is waged above them? And it is an interesting movie despite many flaws. But David O. Russell's desire to make a portrait of the unexamined war led him past the fighting. The coalition campaign is studied for its military brilliance, but the young director leaves the highway of death for West Point curriculum and begins his story after Saddam flees Kuwait. Released in 1999, Three Kings is not a conventional war film. It's actually a very difficult movie to classify overall. If you only watched the first 30 minutes, you would probably think it's a black comedy of some sort, and a pretty damn good one. The day job's cutaway is still one of the funniest things I've ever seen, and it becomes more relatable the older I get.
I don't really have a day job, sir.
But the Iraqi ass map does not lead to a pot of Kuwaiti gold at the end of a rainbow. The Iraq they find is far different than what they imagined. When they roll into the plaza where they expect to find the golden bunker, they're greeted as liberators. But this raises the question, why do we need to rescue civilians from the people we just defeated? It's this defiance of expectations that transforms the tone of Three Kings and the characters themselves. Major Gates, played by George Clooney, is the only one who understands the reality on the ground. The US encouraged the people to revolt, they did, and the wrath of Saddam is upon them. Now, Gates is told early in the film why the massacres are being permitted. We don't want to do Vietnam all over again. With the benefit of hindsight,
my fellow citizens, at this hour,
it's not difficult to explain geopolitically why Saddam should have been left in place. Things can always get worse. That could be the motto of the Middle East, sadly. Now, although the arguments about intervention and when it's necessary are important to Three Kings, greater focus is put on the individual characters and how they're changed by the brutal truth of Iraqi society following the ceasefire. Gates, Barlow, Elgin, and Conrad set off from their base with a simple premise. We're going to steal from the thieves. Saddam's men can't touch us, so we're going to go in, grab the gold, and get out as quickly as possible. It's a heist movie at the start. Danny Ocean rips off Saddam. But when the men understand what's going on, they feel a moral responsibility to help the dissidents. Some feel it more strongly than others, Gates in particular, but none of the men are unaffected by the cruelty they see. On a pretty cool side note, the beautiful plaza set was designed by the director of Twilight of all people, Catherine Hardwicke, and the graffiti we see was actually done by Iraqi refugees who defaced posters of Saddam during the uprisings. So you can't get more authentic. According to the director, one major goal of Three Kings was to resensitize the audience to violence. The now famous cuts to inside the human body to show the damage done by being shot was a product of that goal, and as was the entire standoff sequence at the plaza. After blood is drawn, there are a bunch of shots of people just watching in silence, absorbing the death. Our main characters even seem to freeze in time. It's a very effective, sort of surreal way to show something like this, and I think it totally works. Now, the bloodshed forces the boys to choose. Do we leave the people who will absolutely be brutalized for what just took place, or do we stick to the plan, stick to necessity. As the authority figure, Gates chooses to help the people, and the younger guys accept it. But right after fleeing the village in a T-72, the story transforms again in a cloud of Iraqi gas. At the beginning, the Arabs are the other who should be ignored. The very strange, bleached look early in the movie is used to show how alien their world is to our characters. Then they become the innocent people who need to be saved. But now it's the Arabs who are saving the Americans. And in the cave, they become three-dimensional, negotiating an agreement to become equal partners. You get the gold, we get the hell out of this country. So we see the comedy, we see the drama, and then the final 45 minutes is a blend of the two. The best acted scenes of the movie are between Mark Wahlberg and the terrific Saeed Taghmaoui. They have a long debate about a variety of topics ranging from Michael Jackson's face to their families, the war, and why the US intervened. It's a verbal boxing match from each side of the conflict. This conversation is included to add a layer of depth to the men our characters are fighting, and it works because the performances are so good. Just like the village standoff, this is a dark, tragic, emotionally heavy scene. What follows is much lighter. Gates and the others execute a ploy pretending to be Saddam and nearly capture the bunker without firing a shot because Saddam is a Grim Reaper, as well as an academic, doctor, businessman, general. Saddam is all things to be admired. The bunker itself has more of this mix we see throughout the movie of American consumerism and third world poverty. Blue jeans, televisions, and blenders are hoarded as people are desperate for food and water. The director noticed this motif when living in Central America, and it's very visually interesting. Now, being a big budget studio film, Three Kings does need to check some boxes. Mark Wahlberg must take off his shirt. He was forced to do it. There needs to be a big third act action sequence, which is more interesting in that the US allowed Saddam to use his helicopters after the ceasefire, a decision the Bush administration would come to openly regret, so there's a deeper element there. And of course, the civilians must be saved, and our heroes walk away to a happy ending after learning to value human life more than their own selfish desires. Most movies that try to do too much, tonally, thematically, collapse under the weight of their own ambition. Stories that are focused and consistent tend to be the best. One of my biggest critiques of modern cinema is that even the quality films try to do a bit too much. Every Best Picture nominee in 2025 is over 2 hours. Even though the Gulf War was a relatively short war, Three Kings looks at it from many different angles. The leaders of the US, were they right to leave Saddam in power? The US soldiers, how difficult was it to stand by during Saddam's crackdown? The Iraqi soldiers, how did they justify fighting for Saddam? The Iraqi people, do we stay and fight or flee? I could go on and on. There are countless questions raised by this story. And as already mentioned, there's drama and comedy, there's commercial action and auteur stylization. Three Kings is not a perfect film. There are very few perfect films, but it's pretty damn good considering that it's a nickel-wenda balancing act. There are some stumbles, but it never falls into the Grand Canyon. Ultimately, the goal of Three Kings is to reframe our perception of the Gulf War in an entertaining and memorable way, and it achieves that. The characters might not be the most complex, but they're likable and you root for them. Conrad is my favorite. I think Spike Jonze kills it. His friendship with Troy is great. I mean, we've all seen that dynamic before. And as their heist goes sideways, we come to realize that just because the war objective was completed doesn't mean that there were no more difficult choices to make. It's actually the opposite. And for a movie that has Ice Cube blowing up a little bird with a foam football, it does a great job digging into the deeper layers of the conflict. Love it or hate it, Three Kings really is a one-of-a-kind movie. Alright guys, thank you so much for stopping by. If you have a favorite scene in Three Kings, make sure to leave it in the comments. And if you want to be notified when more videos like this are posted, make sure to subscribe on your way out. Have a fantastic rest of your day. I will talk to you soon.